All right. Linda, let's get started. If people keep joining us, and throughout the time here, I will just keep letting them in, and I'll make sidebar questions to them so I don't interrupt you, or let them know to put their questions in the side there. But thank you, Linda Hinz, for joining us tonight to teach us all about turkey calling. Linda's coming to us straight from the awesome state of Wisconsin. So, there's some good turkey calling happening there. My husband's looking at me weird. But all right, so Linda's going to tell us about all the different types of calls, and we're going to get into a couple scenarios, some tips and tricks, and some possible ideal blind setups. So Linda, I'm going to take myself off video, but you take it away.
Are you ready for me? All right.
Yep.
Sorry, I thought I had that muted. Am I up here for next week?
Anyway. I thought that was your opening intro. You had a theme song for yourself.
It would be something else. All right, so thanks for coming along tonight. Hopefully I can tell you what I know about turkey hunting and share some things. I kind of thought that we'd start off with the hardware of the calls and the different types that we've got. And then we'll get into the sounds, and then we'll do a few other things after that. But not all, you don't necessarily have to use a hardware call. Turkeys are used to having natural sounds as well. So maybe if you had an old wing, you could use a wing on a tree. As turkeys walk around the woods, at least in Wisconsin, we have lots of leaves and things on the forest floor. So when the turkeys are feeding, they usually take like step, step, scratch, scratch, step, step, scratch, scratch. So those natural sounds on the forest floor are really important to know. One of the first turkeys that I ever got on my own was I had gone to a class, and the instructor told me that's tip of, rake the leaves. Well, I got so excited when I saw the turkeys, I dropped down to my knees and crawled over to a tree. And as I got so excited, I left my call right where I dropped down because I was afraid of being seen. And then when I got to my tree, I didn't have anything. To call with, and they were walking through some tall grass, and I thought, well, what on earth can I do here? I needed them to pick their head up to be able to have a shot at them. So I reached down and I raked in the leaves, and sure enough, the turkey stuck his head up, and I was able to harvest him just through that natural call. Another way might be patterning them. So if you live on a property that's got 20 acres and you look out your kitchen window and you see at 2 o'clock every day they walk along through a certain area. I've had people that we've taken out and they said, oh, we didn't even use a call. We just know that they walk by at a certain time. And so they just positioned themselves in that area and shot them when they came by. So not all turkeys are killed by an actual turkey call. But if you are starting, I would say one of the most basic calls would be a push-pull call. This is called a Quaker Boy Easy Yelper. It's a very, very simple call. I don't typically use one, but I brought one for today. But you can, in order to do a yelp on it, you just push the little stick. And in order to do a purr on it, you just push slower. And to do a cluck, it's just short, not quite as long as the yelps. Not quite as good on a yelp on that. Another thing is a lot of people that I know would take something like this and tape it to their gun, so that when they have their gun up on their knee, all they need to do is use their finger to do the call. Because sometimes when they're within range or almost range, and you just need to draw them a little bit more, you have to be so careful of their eyesight, because they have such a tremendous eyesight that you just cannot move. You almost can't blink. That's why you wear that full camo and wear that face mask up over your nose, gloves, you name it. You want to be camo, you want to be quiet, you want to be still, you want to be prepared when that bird comes close enough to you. Skip to the next one. Next is a mouth call. So this is a mouth call. They come in all different kinds, double reed, single reed, triples. They come in youth models, adult models. The benefit of this is it's hands-free. So if you can use a mouse call, you don't have to worry about having something mounted to your gun or using another type of call. You can just put this in your mouth and make your calls that way. I'm not good at a mouth call. I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to show you that I can't do it. But if you're going to do this, make sure you're practicing ahead of time and that you actually sound like a turkey before you try to use it.
Linda, what's the best way to practice that? Would YouTube videos be sufficient?
Yeah, and years ago when they started to, when I first started seeing this, they'd sell mouth calls along with like a CD at that time. And then you'd stick it in your car and you could practice as you're driving, put it in there and on your way to work or whatever you could practice. They do give you some ideas like on the packaging of how you should blow into it. I just have never really mastered it, nor have I found a need to be able to use a mouth call. I've been very successful without. One thing I would say for women maybe, or for kids is I used, when I did try, the youth models fit my mouth better. Otherwise, this is a normal size, and I'd have to take a scissors and cut some of this away because it just didn't fit my mouth. So maybe that was part of my problem. Other things that we would want to talk about would be like a locator call. I usually carry like a crow call or an owl call with me. Sometimes for when I'm scouting. If I'm scouting preseason, I don't really want to be calling to the turkeys to let them know that I'm really trying to get them to come in, because I'm not. You don't want to educate your turkeys before the season of your calls. You want to wait until the season. So if you just like drove up to the property and the property that you were going to hunt was right off from your car, you didn't have to walk to get there, you could just blow a crow call or an owl hoot, or out west you might even do an elk call. Anything that's a loud, shocking call can sometimes shock gobble a tom into responding, just gobbling. That will help you know if you're scouting, oh, there are turkeys on this property. And if you're hunting and you want to find out if that turkey is, if there's a tom there, but you don't really, you're at the road and you want to get to a place in the property without spooking them. If you blow your call and say, oh, he's way off, or nothing responds, then sometimes you could just move in a little bit more freely. But it does help if you can identify that there's one 300 yards out there. You put your owl hooter away and you start walking, and you cut the distance in half maybe before you make another call. Then we're going to move on to like friction calls. So I'm going to show you a few box calls. So box calls are made of wood. They're made of various kinds of wood. A lot of times they'll do, this is the paddle, and then you've got your box. So this is a long box call. And you could call off both sides of this call. They do make some that you can only call off of one side. I think we usually buy ones that you can use both-sided. The longer the box call, the greater the distance, the louder it is. So on a really windy day, a really long box call might be nice. I personally don't carry a long box call with me. They're a little bit clunky to keep in your vest and keep them quiet. What else? So there's also a screw in the box call. So if it's not sounding right to you, you can adjust that screw a little bit, and then try it again and adjust. The other thing with box calls is you use chalk on them, on the paddle part, so that part would get chalked. So we normally use a brown chalk. It's kind of made for turkey calls. I don't know what else you'd use it for. But if you don't have brown chalk, this is just a little bit softer than like chalkboard chalk or kids chalk. You can certainly use that as well, but you just take it and run it right over that paddle. Carry your chalk with you out in the woods, because you're gonna, if you're calling with a box call, you're gonna want to re-chalk it every couple hours. Anytime that it doesn't quite sound right to you. The other thing is when you're traveling with a box call, this is the size that I normally keep with me. This is made of yellow poplar, and I'm not sure the other darker wood. Two kinds of wood. This is like my favorite box call, but it fits really nice in my vest. I usually keep a hairband on it to help make it quiet, but sometimes I still don't like the way that it sounds, so I'll just take a piece of material and shove it in there so that if I'm walking, I'm not calling while I'm walking, unless it's intentional. Let's see, other things about box calls. I got this one after I learned the lesson of when your vest gets all wet and you're out hunting and it starts raining and you get soaked, that none of the pot calls or box calls or push button calls work very well after they get all wet. So this particular call is made, it's a waterproof call. So it can get as wet as you want, and it still just works fine. So I usually have that as my second box call, just in case the weather's bad.
Linda, what all sounds can you make with a box call?
You can make you can make quite a few. Let's see, we'll do just a little bit. So purring isn't something that I can do really great on here. A pot call is going to do much better. You can cluck on it. You can yelp on it. And you can hear it's pretty loud. You can kind of do a cackle. And the other thing you can probably do on it and I wouldn't do this unless you're on private land and you're really sure that you're the only person and nothing else has worked, and maybe you're in a blind or someplace that you know you're really safe, but you can gobble on a box call. Sometimes it'll sound a little bit more like a Jake than a Tom. I'll just try it and we'll see what it sounds like. And all that is that hairband on there, and I'm just giving it a shake. So you can do quite a few different noises on your box call. They do really sound like a hen. You know, you still want to do the same cadence. You know, if you're yelping or if you're cutting, it's that cadence that you want to try and repeat or sound like that hen. And the other thing, I guess, on a box call is how do you hold it, right? I hold mine like this. My husband is more like this. There's no right or wrong way. It's whatever feels good for you, whatever works for you. And there's very little pressure. Some people think that you have to like have a lot of pressure on it. I'm really not. You're just sliding that paddle right across the top. Hardly any pressure at all. Sometimes a box call is not the right call. If a turkey, he might respond to this and he's quite a ways off. If you hear that turkey is getting closer, I probably would back off of my box call and move to a softer call, just because these are so loud. But great for a windy day because it really reaches out and calls at a greater distance. Let's move on to what they call pot and peg. I kind of call them slates and strikers. But they're all the round type calls. So they sell ones that are made of glass, slate, crystal, aluminum. These calls are very easy to master. When I got a new one, I wanted to make sure that I could show you. So this was a new Primos Power Crystal. Just got it. And along with it, they sent me sandpaper. And they tell you right on it that you need to sand it. So I left this side is just like out of the packaging. And then this side I roughed up. So I used sandpaper. And I also have this little handy dandy little tool that helped me scrape it up. So I use, if this is the top of my call, you're going to press pretty hard. You're going to use that sandpaper, and don't be afraid to dig right in. You want to rough this up really hard. And I'm only going to go up and down. Choose your direction that you're going to scrape it. And always do it the same direction. Don't go this way and that way. Just always the same direction. And what the benefit of that is, once you've scraped it, when you use your striker or your peg, you're going to go across that grain. So I scraped it this way. When I call, I'm going to go across. Let's see, it's going to do so you can see. I'm going to go across that grain. And that's what's making your sound. The different types of pot calls have different, could have different material that you use to treat the surface of it. Things like Scotch-Brite squares, rubbing alcohol, like eyeglass lens cleaner wipes. It just depends on what type of call that you get. Just read the package as far as, do you use sandpaper on it? Do you use alcohol wipes on it? Those are things that you want to think about and then carry in your vest. The other thing you should know about pot calls is the sound comes out of the bottom. Probably. So this one's got holes on the bottom. This one's got different types of holes. That one's got a bunch of different holes. So since that sound is coming out on the bottom, when you hold your call, you just don't want to have it flat in your hand so that that call sound is all muffled. You just want to give it some air so that the sound can come out. You also have oils on your hands, so try not to touch the surface of your call, or you're going to have to rough it up more often. So what else? So strikers. I usually carry several with me. Not all strikers sound great on all pots, but they do sound different. So if you have multiple strikers, they're going to sound a little bit different, and that gives you a variation. Some turkeys, when you might call with one striker, they love that call. If they love that call, don't switch and start using a box call or a different pot call. Just if they're responding and they're listening to that call, use that call. So you can get a lot of different emotion and pitch and tone from a pot call. The other thing is, after you have it gripped in your hand, this other free hand, I usually try to rest my hand on the edge of the pot or on my fingers. So about like so. This striker, you're going to try and hold it like at a 45-degree angle to make your sound. If you go straight up, that doesn't always work. So try to get that 45-degree angle. And that's just a simple little purr there. You can adjust your volume on that. So if I were going to do that purr and I wanted it to be louder, I just push a little harder. Or softer. And that's the only call there, the purr, that I'll use if that bird is 50 yards away. I'm probably only going to purr. I'm not going to yelp at him and make him think that I'm a really loudmouth hen. I'm going to try and just entice him. The purr is something that is a very content call. What else?
It was a super impressive purr there. Do you ever rough up your strikers?
Yes, definitely. I probably do those just about as often as I'll do the surface. And I'll rough the surface of these, carry your sandpaper as well with you. I'll probably rough it every hour or two, just depending on how much you're calling or if you're switching between calls. But if you take your striker and it makes funny sounds and sounds you don't want, chances are you need to go back to your sandpaper or treatment and do it again.
Do those need to be roughed up in a specific direction as well?
The pegs? No. You can just, normally what they'll tell you is, and some of them have kind of a different tip. I think I put away all my big fat ended ones, but usually you just put it in the palm of your hand and like so. They're kind of rounded a little bit on, most of them are rounded on the end, and that kind of just helps do the whole, it kind of makes a round thing when you press it in your palm. There are strikers that are hollow inside, and some of those you don't really need to do any treatment. They're made of a different material. They're not actually wood. So it just depends on the type that you're carrying, as far as if you have to rough it up or not. Questions as far as calls go?
What about most ideal type of call? Like, when would you do the Yelp versus the Cluck or the cut?
Why don't we skip and kind of talk about the sounds, and then we'll get into the scenario part. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. Let's start off with a Yelp. A Yelp is a basic turkey sound, probably one of the most heard sounds from a turkey. When a turkey yelps, it's usually in a series of 3 to 8 notes, mostly in a sequence, and it just shares that turkey's location to other birds. It's basically a, hello everybody, I'm over here. It kind of falls off a little bit at the end. So I'll use this Primos call, and let's do just a simple yelp. And I'm kind of making either like C's or small circles. They're probably not much more than a half an inch. Same 45-degree angle, sound coming out the bottom. Let's see if I can give you a little variation. We'll just grab a different call. Let's try it on a box call. This one I probably need to chalk. Definitely louder, really get somebody's attention. You can see how that one's somebody's gonna hear it. It's a good call for when a hen is kind of on the prowl and looking for a tom. It's natural for the tom to gobble, right? So he gobbles, and the reason he gobbles is because he says, hey hens, I'm over here. If you want to get bred, you come to me. And it's unnatural for the tom to go to the hen. That's where if you are calling to a tom and he's with hens first thing in the morning, chances are he's not going to leave them because he already knows that he's going to get lucky, right? He's going to breed those hens, and you're just going to have to be patient for that to happen and for him to be ready to move on and go looking for some other action.
What's your typical sequence with that? Do you have, I kind of noticed a sequence of 8 there.
Yeah, 3 to 8 kind of just depends. Sometimes you'll mix in maybe a cluck or a purr. It kind of just, it's more about the cadence than how many notes you're doing. I have heard, when I'm deer hunting, I have heard a hen yelp for 2 hours straight just because she's out there going, hey, I want a friend, I'm alone, and she's just looking for somebody to hang with. And she's yelping and yelping and yelping, and she was just walking around the woods looking for a friend. And that's all she was doing. One other thing about the Yelp is early in the morning, when the birds are still in the trees. I don't know if everybody knows this or not, but the toms will usually be up in the trees, and when they wake up, they'll actually strut or puff up all their feathers while they're up in the trees. It took me probably years to figure that out before I sat down and I was like, oh my gosh, look at that. You know, you see them and they're in full strut up in the tree. It's like, well, that's really cool. But the Yelp is also can be used to draw that tom off the roost and come to a hen call, so a Yelp. I would just in the morning, I'd back everything off and be very, very soft. I don't like to call a lot while they're in the trees. I'm more of a get myself in position, just do a few soft calls, a little purr, cluck here, there, to let them know that I'm in the area. Typically, those toms are the ones that talk first up in the trees, and you get all excited because you're like, oh, he's all alone, right? It's just toms up in the trees, and you're really excited. And then just as it's about time for them to fly down, then you hear that boss hen. And the boss hen is up there, and she'll start yelping, and that gets the tom fired up, and you kind of, you're deflated because he's hanging with hens already, and if there's hens with him, you're going to just have to be patient, because chances are he's going, those hens are going to, when he hits the ground, they're going to go over to him, and that's what he's looking for. So sometimes you just have to be patient.
Yeah, Linda, in terms of strikers, the different types, plastic, carbon, wooden, how do they differ in pitch and tone, and which goes with what? Are they interchangeable with different plates?
Yeah, they really are. I usually will, just grab the one out of my vest, and if I hit it on a call and it's like, oh, this didn't sound quite right, I'll just grab a different one. I couldn't tell you how many strikers I have that aren't a match set anymore. I mean, I don't keep them together because it doesn't really matter anymore. Because they don't have to be a match set. So that's kind of what I like about them is in the beginning of the season, I usually just get all of them out and I get the couple calls in, and I need to decide which devices I'm going to keep in my vest, because I have more than I could carry in my vest. So I usually just say, what are going to be my favorites this year? So I go through and I go, which ones sound the best to me this year? Maybe it's my calling, or maybe it's how roughed up they are, or what striker I grabbed. But I just go through and I pick my favorites for the year. And then if I've hunted for a week or two and one's just not performing the way that I want, then I'll swap it out or leave it stay at home and only take my favorites along. Should we move on to a cluck?
Let's do it.
All right. The cluck basically just says, I'm just here. It's usually a slower cadence, and sometimes it's used with a yelp or just by itself. When a hen uses a single note cluck, it holds a similar meaning to when a tom is in conjunction with feeding or just moving around the area. A cluck. It's just a very short note. Don't do that. Just I'm pushing a little bit harder on this one, and it's a very short.
Are you pulling that towards yourself, Linda?
Yes, I am,
Okay.
but and remember, you're going, if it's scraped this way, you're going to go opposite.
There you go. I was gonna say just a little higher.
Gotta think I gotta raise it up a little bit. That's a simple cluck. And like on a box call, you're just gonna kind of do a sharper motion and strike it on the box. So the difference here is the cluck is a friendly call. They'll cluck as they're feeding and walking along. They'll cluck with a yelp. It's often mistaken. You want to make sure that you know the difference between a cluck and a putt. A putt is an alarm call. It sounds very similar, but usually a little bit faster to me. If you hear a tom, let's say you have a tom in front of you. So here's my tom, okay? This is his snood, and I'm sure if you've been hunting before, you've seen this where it's dragging down in front of him and he's relaxed and that snoot is just wiggling around in the front. If he starts making that pop, 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 and this snoot goes up to the top of his beak, chances are he's going to be gone in an instant. So if he's within range, you best be shooting because he's going to be gone. Putts mean danger. He's telling everybody else there's danger. He's afraid. Something's not right. Watch for the difference between a putt and a cluck.
A question going back to the strikers for a second. Is one type generally softer or more quiet than the other? One type louder, sharper than the other?
Yeah, not really. It's hot. It's the pressure you're using. So let's do a yelp. There, I was pressing a little bit hard. Now I'm going to do the same thing, only not pushing as hard. Can you tell? Can you hear a difference?
Yeah. Yep, you can tell the difference. So would you use one or the other based on how far away they are from you?
Yes.
Okay.
Whatever type of scenario you're in, if they're further away, you can be louder. I remember when I first started, I was always kind of timid. I'd be going, and maybe I was in a blind. My husband would look at me and go, louder. They have to be able to hear you, So I learned to, get louder. So you're going to learn a lot just by doing it. And I won't call them making mistakes, but there's not a time I don't go out that I don't learn something, because you're making decisions like every few minutes. If you're out walking around or if you're sitting in a blind, you're like, oh gosh, are my decoys, far enough away? Or should they be over, should the hen be here and should the tom be there? Or should I have used a jake? You're second guessing yourself pretty much all the time. So I think it's just the lessons that you learn as you move through your education of what you think is best. Not all hen turkeys sound like the calls that we're making tonight. Some of them sound just terrible. They don't even really sound like a hen turkey. And so you don't have to be a specialist or an expert. Just keep trying. Try to work on the cadence. I think the cadence of the call is probably what sells it, because they, hens don't go yip, 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 yip. There's a certain rhythm, and I think as long as you have the rhythm, that's kind of the key.
Linda, I noticed that all the pot calls you've been holding up are all of the crystal. Is that what you preferred?
I guess I do, because I do have a lot of them. This is more of a, I don't even know what you call it. It's a different material. I do like alcohol on this one. And they do say the outer part is usually a higher pitch. Where you get to the middle of a call, it's usually the lower pitched. I usually find that no matter what call I use, there's usually a spot that I prefer on the call, kind of a sweet spot. And once you find it, you just find that you're using probably that quarter size or $half size surface. You're just drawn to that because it sounds the best to you. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Are you? How often are you getting a new call? Because I know when we recorded the episode a couple weeks ago, you had said you were using that Primos one, and then it sounds like you just got another new one. So I'm curious.
Well, I wanted to get the new one so you could see what it's supposed to look like when it comes out of the box. So this is it's just what do you call it? Crystal. But you have to scratch it up. I mean, if you got this and you tried to do, there's no sound whatsoever. You have to rough it up, and don't be afraid. This one I've probably had 15 years, and I keep scratching on it, and it hasn't worn out yet. So, do I get new calls? Yeah, it depends on if I go to the National Convention. What I like about the National Convention is all the calls are out that the call makers have. So generally speaking, or years past, you've been able to try them before you buy them or bid on them, whatever. I really like being able to try a call before I buy it, because I probably have more box calls that I bought that I don't like than I have pot calls. Pot calls I like most of the ones that I've gotten. But yeah, I do. It's probably more like personal preference. I certainly have enough calls that I shouldn't need to get anymore before I die. Because I've got calls, my husband's got calls, my son's got calls. I'd hate to tell you how many turkey calls we've got in the house. So, yeah, it's kind of embarrassing. But girls got to have toys, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Next, we're going to talk about cutting. So, cutting is a series of loud and fast clucks, maybe mixed in with some yelps. It's something that you're not going to use very often. It's when a hen is fired up. If a gobbler has gone silent and you just can't get him to respond, or it's like your last ditch effort. You're going to throw the kitchen sink at him. You want to cut at him. I will see if I can do the cutting on this box call. Well, Actually, I think I'm going to do let's do a slate call first. So it's going to be a bunch of clucks and some yelps. I don't know if any of you have ever had like a boss hen making sounds like this out of the woods. You know, you call a little bit and all of a sudden she fires off back at you like she's mad at you. If you get that, fire back and try and make the same sounds back at her as she does to you. Because what you kind of want is for her to get angry and kind of come over like, hey, I'm the boss here. What are you doing? Who are you? Because chances are a lot of those boss hens have a tom that it's like she's the only one for him, and he's Twitter-pated, and he's going to follow her wherever she wants to go. And if you can call her in, he'll come along. He might be dragging behind, but you kind of let her come in, and maybe she moseys on, and eventually he walks in behind, and that's your opportunity. If you are chirping back at her and all of a sudden you see that she is getting closer, you can kind of quit chirping at her and maybe do some soft calls. Just to keep her attention. But generally speaking, if I've got turkeys 50 yards in front of me that I can see, I generally will put my calls down. I'll more be worried about getting my gun up in position. And I don't know how everybody else does it, but I'll just tell you how I do it. So I'm usually sitting by a tree on the ground on a little pad. I try to get at least my knee up so that I can get my gun resting on my knee, held here on my shoulder, so that if they're 50 yards away, I'm pretty much ready, because I don't want them, with their eyesight being so good, I don't want to wait till they're like at a decoy or 30 yards away or whatever my range is. I don't want to wait till then to get my gun up. I want to have my gun up. I want to be ready. I want to be prepared. And I'll more worry about if I have to call again later, because chances are if they're already coming, you want them to come and investigate. If they maybe pop over a ridge and they heard a call and they don't see anything, they don't see a hen, chances are they might just turn around and they're gone. And there's nothing you can do about that. You can't have a hen that's just going to pop up, right? If you're not a hen and he sees that and there's clear visibility and he can't be looking for you and he sees you're not there, he's probably going to just turn and walk away, or he'll just start feeding and maybe he will walk in. It's kind of just depends on what kind of scenario you're looking at, and whether or not you're going to use a decoy or whatever. If he's coming in, you certainly wouldn't want to do this cutting at him. You'd want to be much softer. Those little, the purrs. The purrs are something that is a very soft content, and I think that's why this is like my go-to call. If I really want to purr when they're coming in, this call is always the one in my vest, which I know that I can do a good purr on. As long as it's scratched up, I can always get a really nice, soft purr. And I know if it's windy and I have to purr a little louder, just a little bit more pressure, I can count on it. I think that's why I carry this call. This is one that gets to come with me all the time. Think of the purr as someone who's happy, who hums through the day or does a little whistle. It's whatever they're content. If they're feeding, a lot of times they're just feeding along and they're doing that purr. And maybe there's 3 hens and they're just talking back and forth, saying, "Yep, I'm over here." Turkeys generally have, they all work together. I always think of them as like having a sentry or the lookout person. I've hunted in the fall and had a flock of like 20 toms. And they came by my bow stand and I was like, oh gosh, this is going to be exciting, you know. But the first bird, had I drawn my bow when the first bird was behind a tree, I might have had a chance. But I didn't. I thought, well, I'll wait till he passes by and then take an opportunity. But there's no way with 20 birds and 40 eyes that you can even think that you're going to pull a bow up in a tree and they're not going to see you. So yeah, I was busted and didn't have an opportunity on that at all. But so yeah, you always got to think about how many eyes there are and what you're doing and how you can be successful. And kind of think about where you think the turkey's going and what he really wants. If he's coming to a call, I'd say a lot of times you just have to be more patient and call less, and just let things happen a little bit. I know when I first started, I think when the turkeys started to answer me, you know, I would be the one to call right back at him. And then he'd answer, and then I'd call right back at him thinking, okay, we've got a communication going. But a lot of times when that happened and he kept gobbling and I wasn't going to him, what was really happening is I was talking, but the other hens that were in the area were actually going to him, and then he'd shut up. And I was like, well, why isn't he coming? Well, obviously he's not coming to me because he's gobbling and now he's got hens to breed. So sometimes over calling will just, you know, another hen's going to cut you off, and then you have to be patient again, and that's not always fun to wait. So in the morning, they'll a lot of times do something called a fly down cackle. It's usually heard as the turkey leaves the roost to fly down. Most turkeys will start like with a tree yelp, indicating that their location, and then when they're ready to leave the roost, they cackle. The cackle is quick cuts and clucks and cuts, and as it lands on the ground, and then the cadence really slows down, sometimes goes to a yelp. A lot of hunters might take an old wing, or they'll sell wings where you can take that wing and you slap it across your leg. Other people might even use their hat, right? They take their hat and they just bang it against their leg to simulate that fly down. It's so that the tom thinks, oh gosh, the hens are maybe hitting the ground, it's time for me to unroost, and I heard them over this way, so I'm going to go that way. But if you want to try a tree cackle, and I typically don't do a fly down cackle. Like I said, I'll normally just do a couple yelps and clucks, just to let a tom know that I'm a hen and I'm in the area and I'm to his east or whatever. But I will try and do a cackle for you using my box call. So I'm going to try and do like 3 quick clucks, and we'll try to do this cackle. That wasn't too good. Kind of gotta have it. Gotta hold it just right. That's why I'm using the wrong call. This one does it better. Do it again. And then they're hitting the ground. And, a lot of turkeys will gobble in their roost, and when they fly down, hit the ground, all of a sudden everything goes quiet. And this might depend on what season you're hunting, but there are many times when the only time during the day you're going to hear a tom gobble is right off the roost. And after that, they're not going to say a word. So even though you're out there hunting and you know that there were toms in the area, you can't really give up. You kind of have to stay vigilant on staying still, keep calling, and wait for him to come in silently. It's much more exciting if they're talking to you, but that's a lot of them can be silent. So that's the cackle. Again, I probably can't cackle on my pot calls very well, but I certainly can on this box call. I couldn't do it on that other one, but it's more for demonstration. I don't generally do a fly down cackle. I haven't had a need to do that. I think one of the last ones I wanted to talk about is a Kee Kee run, they call it. It's more of a call that we might use in the fall. In the fall, the hens and their poults and toms sometimes travel together, and a lot of states will allow you to shoot hens in the fall. Some hens also have beards, so sometimes in the spring you could shoot a hen as long as it has a beard. I did have a beard here so everybody can see. Hens' beards are usually about like this. They're just thin, spindly. But yes, if you're going to shoot a tom or a jake, any bearded bird, you have to make sure that you see this coming out of their chest. Jakes can be very short. They can just be coming just a little bit out of the feathers. But you do have to identify a tom by the beard before you shoot him. So make sure that you're really looking for this before you do that. But in the fall, when they're all gathered together, one of the hunting techniques is to find that group of birds in the woods or wherever you're hunting, and you either like run in and you scream, or you somehow bust that group up and everybody flies away, and then you kind of go to in the middle of where they were, you sit down, and if you just sit and listen, you'll start hearing and what it is these little turkeys and the lost poults are all trying to gather back up. They're trying to gather back up as a flock. So they're just gently talking to everybody. I've heard it. I've done it accidentally as I'm bow hunting. I've never used the technique to actually kill a turkey in the fall. But that's how it is most lost calls. I'll try to do it. This is an aluminum call. I haven't really mastered it very well, but it's kind of a higher pitched call. And you can kind of hear how it's higher. Like peep, 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 peep. So that's about as good as I can do on there.
Linda, is that kind of a spiral? What are you doing there with the motion?
Yeah, kind of. This one, the instructions had told me to use the outside of the call because it's going to be the higher pitched. So I'm kind of just doing. Definitely traveling further than I have on any of the other sounds. One of the other things I didn't mention is, see if I can find one here. Well, maybe I don't have one that I can give an example of, but I'll show you. So inside of a lot of the slate calls, there's an offside or a small hole. A lot of them you can call on that opposite side, and it just gives you a little bit different tone. So if you've got a call and it's got a little spot on the back, you can call from there as well, just to know that you can do that.
We have a couple of questions here.
Sure.
So the Kee Kee run. So in the springtime, would you use that at all? Hannah and I just started. I'm just going to do a quick little shout out here. Hannah and I just dropped her Upland podcast today, and in our second episode, we had a guest on that talked about. He said, "Don't be afraid to use a little bit of a Kee Kee run in your spring call." So is that what that would sound like? Would you use that personally?
I've never used a Kee Kee necessarily in the spring. I don't see any reason why you couldn't. I think it's more about I don't know that I have ever heard a hen or a group ever do it in the spring, and I busted plenty of birds in the spring by accident, but I've never heard them do it in the spring. But I don't see any reason why you couldn't try it. I mean, it's just another call, and it's natural to a turkey, so I think it'd be okay to try it.
Okay. And then what about a Hen Yelp versus a Gobbler Yelp, or is it same for both?
Yeah, both can do it. I think the thing that's more tricky to me is sometimes when you might think it's a gobbler, or it kind of sounds like a gobble, but it's not quite full. It doesn't quite have the some gobbles sound well. Let's talk about the gobbles. So it's when it's a guttural sound made by the male turkey, and it's when he forces air up through their body, and it usually comes along with a spit and a drum. If the spit and the drum kind of comes from the sound of this guttural sound plus the snapping of when he's snapping his wings down and his feathers and tail up, it makes kind of that boom, and it kind of does sound like a little bit of a drum. So it's a boom. If you've never heard of it in the wild, try to listen to some YouTube videos or whatever and really listen, because if you can hear that spit drum, your bird is probably within 30, 40 yards of you. And you should be ready, because sometimes you'll hear that spit drum and maybe he hasn't said anything, right? Maybe there's nothing, and all of a sudden you hear this noise, and you're like, boy, that sounds like a turkey and strut. You better be prepared, because he's probably within range. You might not be able to see him. Later in the seasons it gets greener and greener, and when you sit down you can see less and less. So I think it's sometimes that when it's not a full gobble, it could be a jake trying to gobble. I've also seen hens who try to go into strut. So the more that you are out there, the more that you experience, the wider your knowledge will get to be.
Okay. So, and she had said that she meant the tom yelping versus hen yelping, tone and length the same, or does it really matter?
I don't know that I'm an expert there. I usually hear toms gobble. I don't usually hear toms doing a lot of yelping. I probably have heard more jakes yelp than toms.
Okay.
What else? Other questions that we have?
I don't see anything yet. What do you got over there with the spurs going on?
Yeah, so I just brought a couple extra things. So one, I have a Lucky Duck decoy here. It's a hen, it's a collapsible hen. What I like about this Lucky Duck decoy is you can collapse it, put it in your vest, and then when you get it out and you want to use it, you just blow into it. She pops right up real easy. There's a little lever that you can strap him so she stays in place. If you're going to start using decoys, you really can't go excuse me, you really can't go wrong using a hen. Toms and jakes, if I use a jake, I'm trying to get a tom to come into, usually it's a jake and a hen, and the dominant tom will probably go, hey, that's just a puny little jake, I'm going to go beat him up, and that hopefully will entice him to come in. There's different types, standing, feeding. I've seen, turkeys lay down in the field if it's raining, but you can't go wrong using a hen decoy. I generally only use decoys when I'm on a field or a place that is more open. I guess out west there's areas where it's more open. You've got your woodlands. I've found sometimes in the woods, if it's more heavily wooded and that turkey's coming in and all of a sudden he sees a decoy, sometimes they'll just turn around and go the other way. I think that some turkeys get educated as the season goes on, where maybe they've been with maybe there were 3 toms together, and they came into decoys once, twice, several times, and one of them got shot. I think that they somehow remember a little bit of that. Sometimes we educate birds, right? We call them in, they know that something's wrong, or they caught us moving. The more that you call to those birds, the smarter they get. So the later in the season you are, and the hens are now off on the roost, the toms that are left at the end of the season are a lot smarter than they were in the beginning of the season. If you're hunting the first week, excuse me, I need a drink. If you're hunting the first week of the season and you've got those toms on the roost that gobble and gobble and gobble and gobble and gobble, those are 2-year-old birds, because they're so excited that this is their first year to breed that they gobble and gobble and gobble. Excuse me. So if you're able to kill a bird late in the season, they're usually the older birds, and they usually gobble a lot less. They're a little bit smarter. One of the things I wanted to make sure that I mentioned was, let's say that you shot a bird, right? And it's out there and it's flopping around, and you get excited and you go on out there and it's still flopping around. You might have seen on TV where they'll just pick them up by their legs and let them finish flopping. This is a spur. This is a sharp spur. This bird was probably 3 to 4 years old. These are so sharp that if I even imagined picking this up, can you imagine if it jammed into your arm? Many people get spurred because they try to do that. If your bird is still flopping around and you don't want to just let him flop around, just take your boot, step on his head, and just hold your boot on his head until he's done flopping. That's the easiest way to do it. Don't try and pick him up and get spurred. One of the other things I got here is Permethrin. I don't know, in other states, Wisconsin has quite a few ticks. I use this religiously every year. I take my hunting clothes, everything from my hat to my face mask to my vest, collars and cuffs, and I spray the whole thing. My jacket, everything. And since I've used that, I don't get ticks. It works great. The other thing I did bring, excuse me, I brought is, if you're going to target practice your shotgun, these are really nice types of targets. So you can record how far away it was. In this area that's highlighted here in his head, obviously is your kill zone. So you want to make sure when you're patterning your gun that you've got 10 to 15 shots within this zone, right? So if you're shooting us that 40 yards away, just make sure that that's a good kill. It really only takes one BB, but generally speaking, I try to pattern, and I'd be comfortable if I got 10 to 12 at 40 yards on a target like this. And you always want to make sure that you're aiming so where, on this, right where his head, end of his head meets his feathers, right here, that's where you're going to aim, right here. Because your pattern opens up, right? It makes a big circle, and you want to have the biggest area. So if that tom is in strut, right, his head's all down in his body and he's in strut, your target is so much smaller. But if you wait till that bird puts his tail down and picks up his head, and he has, their heads can stretch out to be almost a foot tall. That gives you a much bigger target. Plus, then when you shoot, you're not like blowing through his tail or, taking his beard off or whatever. So try to shoot them when they're not in strut. And the other thing is, a lot of times multiple birds come in. You also have to be careful that if there's 3 together, that you wait until they separate. And I usually try to, I'm probably more of the 4 to 5 feet apart. I like enough distance that I know that I'm not gonna injure another turkey, or if there's another one behind it, knowing your target and beyond, you just don't want to end up shooting another bird, or you're going to call in the game warden and say, I made a mistake.
In some states, we can have more than one.
Yeah, in Wisconsin, well, typically, unless it's a really late week, we can get one.
Linda, going back to the decoys for a second.
Yeah.
With the prices of the decoys, there's so much variety in that. Like Sarah mentioned here, the Quaker boy is $15 versus the Dave Smith at $100. So what has been your experience? And I mean, do you think those more expensive ones are going to pull in the big boys a little bit better?
Well, I've had some really ugly decoys over the years. Not that they haven't worked, but I think the trouble with some of the earlier ones that I've used is they were open in the bottom, so that and they were just on a little stake, right? So they're out there wiggling around, which was fine. But if it was a windy day, sometime they'd start spinning, which is kind of unnatural. And the other thing that could happen is they just blow off the little stake. I would say you could probably get like a medium range one. I probably wouldn't go with the cheapest, because you're going to have them for years. And they do look pretty realistic now. So I guess I would, maybe try and buy one and, start with a hen, and then if you want later, the other thing you can do is, let's say you harvest a tom, okay? And you're not going to do anything with the tail, right? It's just, you could throw it out, right? You can just take that tail, dry it out, fanned out, put it on a stick, and use that as a decoy. Because you stick it out there, they don't know that there's not a head on the other side. It depends what direction they come from. And I've seen them just use that, walk up to a tail just wondering what it is. So use what you've got. If you can get something secondhand, by all means, get it, try it. Some toms will come into decoys and some won't. So the quality is kind of personal preference. It's however much you think you want to spend. If I'm starting out, I'm getting what I think that I need. I personally spend less like on blinds, because a lot of blinds are heavy for me, and if I'm going to carry one in along with my vest and my gun, I want a lightweight blind and a chair. You end up kind of feeling like a real pack mule. I'd rather get a blind that fits just me, or is like a little 2-person blind that I can carry easily and pop it up. Because if you do harvest something, then you're going to have a turkey to carry out along with all the rest of the stuff. So,
Thank you. That's really interesting to hear about what you said about the tails, just putting it on a stick per se, because my impression is that turkeys are just super keen on eyesight, and so I wouldn't have thought you could really fool them that way. But then there's this act of reaping. Is that legal in Wisconsin?
yeah, it is.
It is. Okay.
I've been witness to a reaping. My son actually did it. We were on a property that was a huge, big field, and we'd have to park and we'd have to walk probably, I don't know, 500 yards across a giant field to get to where the woods was. And it seemed like no matter what time of day we got there, if it was after sunup, there were always birds on the field. And we could never get to where we wanted to go to set up because there were always birds on the field. So the one day we got there and we happened to have a tom decoy with us, and he said, well, I'm going to try and just take that decoy and walk out there at him. So it was safe because he was in the middle of this giant field. And I said, I'm just going to sit back here in the weeds and watch, which I did. And it was really kind of fun to watch because he kind of squatted and walked the whole time. And I was like, oh my God, that would be so hard on my body to try and keep that low, because he kept really low with that decoy trying to, and he got probably about 200 yards closer to the turkey. And there was a flock that was out there. Some of the other birds left the field, but the only one that stayed out there was the tom. And it seemed like once he got to be probably about 80 yards away from that tom that was out there, all of a sudden the tom kind of looked at him and just started walking right at him. And this wasn't a decoy that had a hole in the tail or anything that he could really see what was happening. He'd kind of have to peek under it or peek around it, which he was trying not to do. And it ended up that turkey got probably 30 yards away from him, and all of a sudden he's like, oh my gosh, it's like right there. So then he's like, now what, So he just dropped the decoy and had to get his gun up and point and shoot, and he ended up getting the bird. So it was pretty interesting to watch. But yeah, he could barely walk the next day because his legs were cramping so bad from trying to squat walk for 500 yards.
Right.
But yeah, so it was pretty fun. But dangerous if you don't know exactly where you are. I think people should be really cautious with even carrying decoys. Use an orange bag. Or make sure that when they're in your vest, their heads are tucked in. There's too many accidents that shouldn't be accidents just because people aren't identifying this is a turkey and this is a beard. You have to see this to know it's a tom turkey. Just because somebody's walking around with a red sweatshirt doesn't mean that it looks like this. Too many accidents happen because people are careless.
Good point. The importance of identification.
Very much so.
And I like what you did there with that's a keychain, right? With the beard?
Yeah, I think it really is. So we don't use it for anything.
I like that.
Do you want to talk about like blinds and advantages, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and maybe with early season versus late season,
Yeah.
with them being more pressured and how we can, I don't know, in Montana here, we're already 2 weeks into it, and I know I can't pull my guy off the ridge for the life of me right now. So yeah, let's give some tips and tricks here.
Okay. So the advantage of using a blind, I'd say, is comfort, concealment, movement. It's great for new hunters if you want to take kids out with you. Um, and you can always get out of it and still go pursue if it, you're not stuck in it just because you have it set up. Um, the disadvantages, I guess, are it's less of a challenge. Depends on what you're looking for. When I turkey hunt, I like the exercise part of it. It's also harder to tell the bird's direction when you're in the confines of a blind. You almost have to put your ear to the window or out the window to go, oh yeah, I think it's coming from the east. Or another thing that's nice is in a blind. I don't have one here, but I'm sure everybody knows what, you can use a stick to steady your gun, or the blind window. If you need a rest, holding a gun on your knee or if you can't hold it on your knee, holding that gun up for 5 minutes, it tends to get heavier and heavier and heavier. You can also, use your shotgun. You can use a crossbow from a blind or a compound bow. One thing that I would say is if you are using a blind, usually they have windows on all four sides. If I have a bird that comes out across the field and he's 200 yards away, 100 yards away, I'm going to be closing the blind windows behind me, and maybe even the side ones if I have time, just so that it's darker in the blind. I still usually use a face mask in the blind, unless I'm positioned quite a ways back. And that way, your silhouette or you're not being seen through the blind. Just because you're in a blind doesn't mean that you can't see movement back and forth. That's why I close behind. What else? If you're going to use a blind, and you can set it up prior to, let's say you're on private land, if you can set that up ahead of time, by all means do so. Pattern your birds, know where they're roosting, or where, maybe their travel patterns, to know where you're going to position the blind. You can put the blind out the same day, and turkeys aren't like deer. Turkeys aren't going to blow and say, hey, that's new here today. Turkeys don't care. You can pop a blind up anywhere and they'll just walk right on by it. They don't care if it's new. If I knew that birds were roosted, I would probably try to get my blind within like 100 yards of it, set it up ahead of time, stake it down good so it doesn't blow away, because I've had that happen where I didn't stake it down well enough, and when I got to my spot, my blind wasn't there. So stake it down. If you have to pop it up the day of, get there plenty early. If they're you got to think, they're up in the trees, right? And maybe they can see out to the field. If you're in that pre-dawn, where they can see movement out on the field, or they catch any sort of movement, or they think there's any sort of danger, they might not gobble on the roost. And chances are, if they caught any wind of any activity out there, they'll just drop down when they fly down, and they'll just go the other direction. I've made that mistake. I'm thinking, oh gosh, I'm going to get nice and close, but I had to pop a blind up, and it makes some noise when you do that. That's why if you can do it ahead of time, get your chair in there, so all you have to do is quietly walk up, and I'll leave my decoy in the blind. I'll get my decoy out, put it out in the dark, make sure that you're not silhouetted, that you got there too late. If I get there too late, I probably won't put the decoy out, just because I'd rather have the birds come looking than I would rather have them feel free and comfortable to come out than to spook them and have them go the other way. One of the other things about a blind is making sure that you get that barrel of your gun outside the window. Sometimes a bird will come in, and he'll kind of be circling and he'll come fast. He might come into the decoys, right? He's coming fast. And you think you're going to shoot him out one window, and then, oh, nope, I got to pull my gun in and get it out a different window. You really want to make sure that your movement, right, is slow, because that barrel is also movement, right? So try to determine what window you're going to shoot out of, but know that you're probably going to have to switch it. I've had taken people out where we've had to go from this window to that window to this window to that window, and you just have to be very careful about that. If I were going to use a decoy from a blind, I'd probably be positioning it out 15 to 20 yards. 20 yards, most 20 gauges or 410s or smaller calibers are going to reach out to 20 yards. I usually will have the hen and then the tom behind. They don't have to necessarily be a certain distance from one another. I'll usually try to position them so that they can be, if there's a higher spot, I'll usually try to put them on a little bit higher spot, just so that they can be seen from whatever direction the birds will be coming from, right? You don't want to kind of hide them, or you want the birds to be able to see them. What else? But otherwise, blinds can be super comfortable. You can sit in there with a friend and visit and not have to worry about your movement so much, especially in the later seasons where maybe the birds aren't quite as talkative, and you have to be patient and wait the day. Maybe your birds don't come out till late afternoon, and that can be a long sit. So having a blind makes it a little bit more comfortable. What else?
Perfect. I don't know if anybody has any questions, put them in here. You covered a lot. I have several pages of notes here, Linda, that I've been taking, and I'm glad I actually remembered to hit record on this, so I can go back to it when I need to, because I know I will. You've sent a lot of awesome information here.
Yeah, I didn't talk like shot. Use a turkey choke in your gun, so that the pattern is better for shooting. I use a 12 gauge, which on the barrel or on your gun, it's going to tell you what shot you can use. I once mentored a man who was my boss, and he had a shotgun that he brought along, and he used a 2 3/4 shot, and I at the time was using a 3 1/2, and I was like, wow, and I think one morning he forgot his shell, and I was like, well, I have some in my vest. I had a 3-inch in my vest, so I said, here, take one of my 3-inch. Well, good thing we didn't have a bird come in, because his gun should not shoot a 3-inch. Always make sure you look at the weapon to make sure that you're using the right size. Because I'd have felt pretty bad if I like had the gun blow up on my boss. That would have been pretty nasty. Go to work and say, "Oh yeah, well, I made a mistake."
Not good.
Not good.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Linda. I think you covered everything really well. Oh, here, Sarah just asked, is tungsten king these days? Well, Sarah, to answer that for me, it is. It definitely is. I'm shooting the Boss Tom shells, and those are non-tox tungsten. What are your thoughts on that, Linda?
I've been using the Winchester Longbeards, but before that I used Federal. So all I know is turkey shot has gotten really expensive.
Yeah.
But I still would make sure that you practice, at least take a shot every spring before you go out. Just this year I was like, my gun shot fine last year. Do I really need to do this? And my husband is religious on this, so we went and shot our guns, and sure enough, mine needed a little bit of adjusting. I was shooting high. So I'm glad that I did that. Spent a few dollars to shoot 3-4 times, but it was hopefully going to be well worth it when I take my gun out and go hunting. So I'm glad that I did it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. Well, thanks, Linda. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for coming on tonight. Like I said, I will have this in the recording. I'll send you guys the link so that you can refer back to it when need be. But yeah, this was super informative. I think the best turkey advice I've ever received, for sure. So,
well, if anybody has questions, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to answer anything as time goes on, or you come up with something new.
Yeah, and your email, tell us what that is.
Yes, it's WITO Linda@gmail.com.
Yeah, so WITO is
Women in the Outdoors.
Linda. Women in the Outdoors, Linda.
Yeah,
because she's
me.
super active with NWTF Wisconsin Women in the Outdoors, and we are making a donation to the Wisconsin Women in the Outdoors for Linda coming on tonight. So
thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you. We sincerely appreciate it.
All right, you all have good luck. I hope you all get a nice big tom.
You as well. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Have a great
Bye.
night.
You.